hopefully I'll get even half that applause after I talk. It's always hard to follow Dennis, so I'm going to do my best job. So I'm going to try to go as quick as I can so that we can finish on time, close on time here. I'll ask that you try to hold the questions till the end unless you're really sure there's kind of a question that everyone would want to know. So I represent the NCI, one of 27 institutes at the NIH. And much of what I discuss will be relevant to everyone, and I'll try to, every one of the institutes at NIH, and I'll try to distinguish that. So I'm hoping that many of you know about how the SBIR program is structured and the eligibility. It is a congressionally mandated program across the government. Any agency that provides funding to universities considered extramural research funding has to give a percentage of that money to small businesses through the SBIR and the STTR program. You're going to hear me say the word SBIR a lot, the acronym SBIR. I'm usually referring to both SBIR and STTR since they are very similar programs. The SBIR set-aside has been increasing over the past 5 years and is now 3.2% and will remain that way for the next 5 years. The STTR set-aside has also been increasing for the last 5 years, and it will stay at 0.45% for the next 5 years. And I say for the next 5 years because I don't know how many people know the news that just about a week ago, the president signed the NDAA, which included language to reauthorize the SBIR program for 5 additional years. The eligibility of SBIR has to be a U.S. small business under 500 employees, owned and operated by individuals in the U.S. It is now okay for it to be owned and operated by multiple venture private equity firms, providing that no single firm owns 50%. For STTR, that core eligibility is the same. What really changes for the two programs is that for SBIR, 2/3 of the work has to be done by the university, by the small business, whereas for STTR, only 40% has to be done by the small business, and STTR actually mandates that there is a research institution as a collaborator that's doing at least 30%. And then that remaining 30% can be either of those two or an additional partner. In reality, many of the SBIRs include an academic partner as well, so it's not that SBIR cannot include academic collaborations. There's just that cap. And I'll talk about kind of how to work within that for partially virtual companies towards the end, so I'll get to that. The other difference is that for STTR, the PI can be at the university. So it is a 3-phase program. Phase 1 is a they call it a proof of concept study. I know those words can have many different definitions. Usually preclinical, again, the Congress termed this phases. They weren't thinking about clinical development when they did that. So a phase in SBIR has nothing to do with a phase in clinical development. So how many people think that the SBIR phase 1 budget is capped at $150,000? Okay, wow, you got 2. Okay. You guys are a pretty educated crowd. Now that is actually a real number. That is the congressional guideline. For NIH, that's not really a concern. And I'll explain why. How many people think that the SBIR budget for phase 1 is capped at $225,000? Just 2. Okay, and how many people think the SBIR phase 1 budget is capped at $300,000? All right, you guys are pretty much the winners. So, budgets are confusing, and you'll see all 3 numbers thrown around a lot. I call them the fake numbers, the half-true numbers, and the true numbers. So, the fake number, as I said, those are congressional guidelines. For some agencies, those are not fake, and those are very important numbers. For NIH, get them out of your head. What Congress did is they told the NIH, we understand that biomedical research is more expensive, and NIH can go 50% above that number. So that means for NIH, the cap would be $225,000. That's half true. But Congress then said that we understand that many areas of biomedical research are even more expensive, and thus, for those areas, the NIH can go above that to whatever the institute thinks would be appropriate, providing that you send a waiver that gets approved by the SBA. That waiver has been approved, and I'd say a wide majority of the topics that you would be working on would be covered by that waiver. So for most of the areas you're working on, it will probably be above that $225,000. Every institute actually has their own limit, but most of the institutes use, including NCI, $300,000 for phase 1. For phase 2 at NCI and many other institutes, it's capped at $2 million. So those are usually the budget numbers that you want to worry about. In the solicitation, it'll list the limit for each institute and what topic areas are allowed. As an example, for NCI, anything related to development of cancer therapeutics, cancer diagnostics, devices, imaging, radiation oncology, digital health, those are all covered by the waiver. So you'll see it really does cover a lot. So as I said, phase 2, really $2 million is most likely the limit you'd have to worry about, usually 2 years. Many of you may have heard about the direct to phase 2. Unfortunately, that did just expire. So if you want to apply for more than a phase 1 from the get-go, you'd have to apply for a fast track. In essence, you're applying for the phase 1 and the phase 2 at the same time, and you would have a milestone at the end of phase 1 that you would show that you completed, and thus would transition to phase 2. We are working hard on trying to improve that timeline from application to award, and we're trying to get to that 6-month mark. To do that, we did change some of the application dates, so keep that in mind. The next application date for most solicitations is April 5th, and I'll get to that. So as I said, I represent the NCI SBIR Development Center. NCI is unique at the NIH in terms of the way it manages SBIR. What we did was we created an office where we recruited mostly industry people that really understood commercialization, and we brought them all into one office, and in this office we manage all the SBIRs and STTRs at the NCI. So for those of you interested in other institutes, what you'll see is there'll be a coordinating person or a coordinating office that can answer any kind of logistical questions, business questions, but then the program officers that have all the different domain expertise would still be your program officer, and you would talk to them about the science. Whereas at NCI, the program officers would advise you on both the science and the business over the course of the award. If there's one takeaway from my talk that I'd like you to get, it's that we created this office to be able to help advise you, and we want you to contact us. So on our website is a very similar version of this, except it has our emails. What I would suggest everyone do is before you apply, identify who has a topic area that fits yours and send them the draft-specific aims page at least a month before you apply and discuss your application with them. They will be able to give you some tangible advice before you submit that application. Here are the 5 central activities of our office. Funding opportunities. Majority of the funds go through the omnibus, which is investigator-initiated solicitation. That's at 3 due dates per year, April 5th, September 5th, and January 5th. Anything related to the NIH's mission can come through that omnibus solicitation. In addition, at the NCI, we also have a separate solicitation for Phase 2Bs. So this is if you've already received the Phase 2, you can get a bridge award. In order to get the bridge award, you do have to show that, to be competitive, you have to show that you have matching funds. So we can see that there's an investor that can help take you the rest of the way. In addition, at NCI, we spend about 1/3 of the funds, of the SBIR funds, on contracts. This is only SBIR, not STTR, for contracts. And what we do is those come out once a year, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And there also are occasionally additional program announcements on the website that are currently active. We now have a tech transfer one in biomedical computing. So as I said, the omnibus next due date is April 5th. The bridge award, I mentioned $3 million. You need to have a phase 2 first, and to be competitive, you need those matching funds. And then the contracts, once a year opportunity. The last one was due in October. Usually follows right around the same timeline, so I would expect the next one would go out in August and be due in October. September at the earliest it would be due. So look out for that. There is on our website a place where you can sign up for updates. If you do that, as soon as any funding announcement hits the street, you will get an email with that announcement and with the topics. We use the contracts topics to put out specific technology areas that both are scientific priorities of the NCI, but are also areas ripe for commercialization and a key industry need. And those are very specific topics where we actually set the deliverables. At the NCI, we do try to engage the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem, so our office will do a lot more than just provide the funding. We do a number of initiatives to then facilitate partnerships between our funded companies and external investors. So once you're in our portfolio, definitely come talk to us about that, and I'd be happy to answer those questions. We also have entrepreneurial training programs, such as the NIH I-Corps program that is managed out of our office. We do a variety of workshops to connect you with other government agencies and things of that nature. So I want to reserve most of the time to talk about how to actually get funded and my guidance on what to do in terms of applications. So it is often needed to get SBIR, but it is not usually easy. They are highly competitive. Funding success rates for the past few years at NCI have been around 10 to 15% for phase 1, so not that different than you'd see for other mechanisms. Higher for phase 2, since that is only eligible to people that have already received a phase 1. I can't tell you how many times a day I get a call telling me, oh, I'm from some great institution. How could you give me a score of X, and how could I not be funded? Yeah, everyone comes from great institutions, everyone is smart, and everyone has a great idea. That from the basis, you have to develop a really strong application. All right, sorry that's repeated there. And I will say one thing that's important to know is resubmissions are usually needed and very common. Usually the first application will often not get funded. One thing to know about SBIR is it is extremely routine for a first application to get what we call unscored, which means it was triaged from discussion. It still got reviewed, but it was in that bottom 50%. And the applicant would resubmit, and they'd get an amazing score and get funded on that resubmission. So do not get discouraged by that. Before you write the application, consider your company's strengths and weaknesses and figure out how you can handle them. And as I said, do contact us before you apply. One thing I always suggest, there's actually a really great government database called the Reporter Database. In it has every project that the NIH has funded. You can go ahead and limit your search to SBIR if that's what you're looking at. But it's really, I always suggest it if you're putting in an application to go ahead and do that so you know what we funded in your space. So if you're developing an antibody against target X, good idea, go check if we funded an antibody against target X and what that abstract looked like, and you'll have a good idea of kind of what that bar would be. In terms of building applications, they start early. They take a while, so start early. There are a series, if you're a brand new company, there are a series of or at least brand new to NIH, there is a series of registrations that you have to do, and you can't do one till the other is complete. That whole process often takes 2 months. So I have the link here, and this This presentation can be shared, so you'll have all of the links. But definitely, if that's your boat, make sure to start that early. So you get all that has to be complete before you can submit the application. There are a series of program application guides, the SF424. Definitely want to look at this. It goes through each form and what needs to be on each form. There is also now a web-based way to apply called Assist, which I've heard amazing things about in terms of helping people walk through that application. And you can do it over a period of time, log out, log back in, and it'll save everything. A lot of people prefer it than to do kind of the old-fashioned way with grants.gov. So definitely consider the NIH Assist platform. It's a fairly new platform. So key number 2, taking time to refine that vision. Definitely, talk to as many people as you can. Seek help from your collaborators. I always say, everyone knows when they get a review statement, there are almost in every case, there is one reviewer that either really liked it or really had a lot of concerns, and then there are 2 reviewers that disagreed. That's pretty much human nature. So I think if you talk to 3 people if you kind of pick 3 people and talk to them about your award, if you're really honest with yourself, and you were going to say, if I said go talk to 3 people in your field, I bet you could tell me which of the 3 is going to be really critical. Go to that person before you apply, because that's going to be the reviewer, or a mind like that person is going to be the reviewer that's going to give you really bad scores. So if you can address those critical concerns ahead, you'll be in a much better shape when you apply. Building the right team. So investigators is a key review criteria. I will say it's usually not the PI that is the concern in review. It's usually missing expertise. So for example, if there are animal studies, make sure that you have a statistician, at least as a consultant, to help advise on those animal numbers and the data and the significance. If you are an engineering firm that's trying to apply something to cancer, make sure you have, you're going to apply it to tumor biology. Make sure you have a tumor biologist as part of the project. Think about all those different areas that the project touches and try to fit them into the team for the project. They don't need to be hired by the company, but they have to be listed there in some way, shape, or form as part of what's going to be funded through the award. Probably the most critical thing is drafting a clear application. I mentioned already to send us a specific aims page. That page is really the score-driving page of the application. The way that should look is the top half to 2/3 should answer this question. If the NCI gets 1,000 SBIR applications a year, which we do, why should this be the one that should be funded? I want to know that answer in that first half of the specific aims page. Really the value proposition that you're trying to sell. What are the competitive advantage? A couple sentences of textual highlights of the preliminary data that you're going to show in the research strategy. So as an example, we've shown in Model X that the tumors regress 60% after administration of our drug. And then I expect in the research strategy to actually see that data. That's what you want to really do in that specific aims page. And then the bottom third to half of that page will be the aims themselves. The reason why that page is so important is really 2 reasons. One, it's usually the first thing the reviewers will read, and it's that first impression. 2, when you get to a review panel, the preliminary reviewers will have read your application. The rest of the viewers will then be invited to join the conversation and score it. They will not have read the whole application, and many times they will pull it up in real time, and they will not have time to read the whole application, and they will look to that specific aims page first and foremost. So you want to answer as many questions on that page as you can. Obviously, with the research strategy, you would back that all up, and you would have a lot more of the details. Letters of support. So the letters of support from collaborators that are going to be a part of the project are required. The letters of support that are most powerful, however, are those that come from someone that's not getting anything out of you getting the award. Key opinion leaders, potential investors that say, if the milestones that they are proposing in this project, if they were able to meet those milestones, we would likely consider an investment in that company. We just need to see this data. A letter like that can be super powerful. So I mentioned kind of getting the feedback and talking to that critical person. The NIH review criteria, they will look familiar. These are standard NIH review criteria with the exception of commercialization. However, for SBIR, they are viewed in a little bit of a different way. So for example, for significance, if you are applying for an R01, you really have to show the likelihood of adding important knowledge to the field, the likelihood of getting a landmark publication, things of that nature. For an SBIR, though, the real critical thing is what's the likelihood of changing the clinical paradigm and actually getting a product on the market and that can help patients. So yes, the criteria are the same, but how they're viewed and what you really have to show is a bit different. If you are not funded, like I said, do not be too discouraged. Contact us. Wait till you actually get the summary statement. We do not get it any earlier than you do. I've actually found that you usually get it about 8 hours before we do. So once you get that, what I always suggest is actually draft a response to those concerns and then have a call with us where I can then use that to advise you on how likely you are to be competitive in a resubmission and if I think that you're really addressing the key concerns based on my read of the summary statement. So definitely think about doing it in that way and getting our guidance. So common pitfalls. Reviewers do not understand your proposal. A lot of that could be grantsmanship. Definitely consider adding more data, adding more details on your approach, which is often missing. And also do not rely on the reviewers actually reading a publication. They usually will not. So if data is critical to kind of proving your point, make sure that data is then pulled out and put into the body of the application and not just referenced in the publication, because the reviewers usually will not then go to the publication to see that data. It's a common mistake that people make. If the comment is that it's not innovative, make sure you're differentiating the project. If it is a reformulation or repurposing, make sure that you really highlight the innovation in that new commercial product. And over-submitting is a key issue. I can tell you that many times companies will send 2 SBIR applications at once. There are a set number of review panels. For example, one NIH review panel is cancer diagnostics and treatments. So most of the therapeutic projects will all be in that same review panel. So if you have 2 cancer therapeutics projects, they're going to go with the same reviewers. And reviewers will usually see that, and one, they'll be concerned, oh, they really don't know what they're doing, they're not focused, and both will get dinged. Another issue is they often will they'll see a weakness in one, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, that's a weakness for the other too. Weaknesses tend to transfer, strengths don't tend to transfer as much. So I strongly advise that you only submit 1 application at once. Now once you get that first award, that's a great time to consider coming back for a second application and a second project so you can stagger your funding and have multiple shots on goal. But focus on getting that first award first. Budget. So I mentioned earlier that there are ways to work within the budget rules. So for example, for the phase 1 rules of having to do 2/3 of the work at the company, that is defined by essentially not the work done at subcontracts. So what does a subcontract mean? A subcontract means that is a collaborator that is involved in both the technical and intellectual aspects. So often an academic collaborator, they're going to do some of the experiments and they're going to help analyze the data. That is a clear subcontract. Now, if it is a situation where you are sending something to a CRO for a specific tox screen or sequencing or anything of that nature, where there is a commercially available assay that they run for many people, you are just sending them your agent, they're plugging it into the assay, they're sending you the data, and you're doing all the analysis. In that case, you're essentially buying a service as a product. and you can actually count that as your material and supplies. And that does not have to be a subcontract, so that can count as part of the 2/3. Now, we cannot fund fully virtual companies, so that should not be all of the company's costs. You should still show that you are doing some work, but that can be some of the company's costs, because we do understand that it does make sense to outsource some things, and thus have tried to work within the rules to enable that. SBIR versus STTR. Usually people will ask me, well, which one's easier to get? It changes every year. The problem with STTR is it is a smaller overall pool of money. So I remember one year, a few years ago, where I actually had to call people that applied a year back when we had tight funds and say, are you still interested in this project, because we don't have enough STTR applications to fund. I think I said that story way too many times, and the next year, we've had a record low STTR funding rate. I think we were able to fund like 4% of the STTR applications. So it went from like 40% to 4%. It's started to equalize now, where I think both SBIR and STTR, at least last year, were in that 10 to 15% range, but there is fluctuations. So the key there is don't worry about which one you think will be easier to get, but which one is a better match. Because if you try to do one that's not a natural match, for example, if the academic is truly driving the project and you try to do it as an SBIR, you're going to get concerns, well, why is the company person the PI when they're not really the one leading the project? So do the mechanism that actually is the natural fit for that project. And that's what your best chance of getting the best score. I will say I didn't put a slide here on how we make our funding decisions. The score is a big part of that. So peer review is really important. You need to be able to demonstrate the value. Things that get great scores will, unless there's an administrative issue, almost certainly be funded. However, we will have some consideration of things that maybe don't have the best score, but still have a pretty close to competitive score. And then we will look at those on a case-by-case basis and think about some of the other commercial aspects and things of that nature. And then phase 1 versus fast tracks. If you actually look at the stats, fast tracks are do not have that much of a lower success rate. However, it's really a self-selecting pool, so that can be misleading. They are a lot harder to get, especially if you don't have a lot of data. So if you don't have that much preliminary data, I strongly suggest a phase 1. If you have, for example, for therapeutics, if you have a lot of in vivo data, then a fast track might make more sense. Of course, anyone guess what my recommendation would be if you should do a phase 1 or a fast track, or how to figure out which one you should do? No guess how to figure out if you should do a phase 1 or fast track? Come on. I've said it 3 times. Contact us. Send us your specific aims page, and we'll tell you if we think it would be competitive as a phase 1 or a fast track. Facilities. They are not required at the time of application, but yes, they are one of the review criteria. So it is important that you can show what your facilities will be. Now, if you do not have a facility yet, what I recommend is getting a letter of support from the facility that you plan on going to with details. Yes, we will supply this space to the company should they get the award, and this is the resources and the machines and everything else that they will have access to. If you do that, then you can get full credit for that facility in your application, and you won't have concerns of, oh, well, where is this company going to do the work, without having to pay the facility a dime. That's all I have. I don't know if you want to take any questions or if you want to move on. I guess we'll take some. No one's kicking me off yet, so go ahead.
I have one question. Is it possible to submit to several different institutions at one time?
It is, again, so you're actually applying to the NIH, not to a specific institution. So the review panels, some of them will have, like I mentioned, the cancer one will have a disease as part of their name or as part of their focus, but they're not technically limited to that. So it really depends. Like if you're doing two things that are totally different, then they'll probably get into different study sections. But just because you think it'll end up in two different institutes doesn't necessarily mean it'll end up in two different study sections. So my comment about really only applying one per cycle would still apply. So it depends on the specifics.
The question was more given by two different institutions.
Oh, for the same application. Got it. Yeah, so it used to be your cover letter, but now there's actually a separate form called the PHS request assignment request form. This was just changed as part of the new package a few months ago. You can use that form to request which institutes you would like to get it, and you can request that two institutes be dually assigned. You can also request which one would be primary. If you don't make that request, then the Center for Scientific Review will look at the application and do whichever one it thinks is best. But you can request that, and you just want to justify it. The same thing on study sections. You can request in that same form which study section would be assigned. Again, if you don't, they will look at the application and send the one that they think is the best fit. However, keep in mind, if you do, they still might not do it unless they really believe the justification. So you really need to have a strong justification of why the study section that you're requesting has expertise that's needed for the proper understanding of your application that the other study sections do not. Okay, I saw here first, and then we'll go there.
You said 2/3 of the budget is done on the phase one. How about fast track?
So same thing. So 2/3 for the phase one, it's 50% for the phase two. So fast track has to meet the same rules for each phase.
If you're working with a engineering consultant for 510K clearance, do they have to be located in the United States?
So any money that is part of the award has to remain in the U.S. with very rare exceptions, and anything relating to cost or familiarity would not qualify for an exception. You'd really actually have to show that that work couldn't be done in the U.S., regardless of cost or familiarity. However, if you are not asking for the NIH to pay for that engineering consulting as part of this award, then you can do that work wherever you would like. I think I saw a question here first, and then we'll go.
Direct to phase two still going to be possible after the new legislation?
So not right now. So when the program was reauthorized just a few weeks ago, one of the reasons they did that is because with obviously a new administration, there's going to be a lot of new priorities. There were concerns that this could kind of fall through the cracks by the deadline of next September. So they wanted to get this in quickly and get it reauthorized. The caveat to that, in order to do it as part of another bill, they had to just extend it as is, which means that anything that was a pilot program in the previous reauthorization would automatically expire. That includes the direct to phase two. It also includes the administrative funding that helped pay for a lot of the initiatives we do, such as facilitating partnerships and things like that. The only way that those would get renewed would be another act of Congress. So Congress would have to pass a revision or something like that that would renew those. For the case of direct to phase two, I could tell you it takes a while that had to be new solicitations, and there's a lot of kind of government issues there in terms of the right electronic system and things like that nature. So it took a year to kind of create the interfaces at the NIH to accept the direct to phase twos. So I would guess if it does come back, just logistically, there's going to be a long gap. Back there, and then we'll come here. Sorry, there and then here.
On one of your slides, you mentioned that it's good to get end users, clinicians to write letters of support. But I've also been told anecdotally that if you have clinicians that you're discussing your idea with a lot, that there's some advantage to having them on as consultants rather than as just people who say this is a good idea. So how do you
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're limited to how many consultants you can have just based on budget. So, you might have one as a consultant, but then, I mean, consultants really each have to have independent value. So you probably wouldn't have 4 or 5 clinicians as consultants. So, you may have both.
Our company has an office in Netherlands, and we are doing R&D for physician ecology in terms of getting precise treatment. So that's funded by European Union, European Commission, and government.
Okay.
We want to apply here, office in Palo Alto, and additional research working with Stanford. The money will not be given to them because we already have funding, plus we have some of this seed funding. Can we apply here and collaborate with them to move the science further?
Yeah, so if there is a fully, they have one office in the Netherlands, and then they created a part of the company here, and they want to know, each office has its own funding. Can they apply here, but then still collaborate with the other office? So one, it depends on eligibility. So if the word office is ambiguous, if the U.S. office is a fully owned U.S. subsidiary, then yes, it will be eligible to apply. Okay, so it's owned in the U.S. Got it. So yes, so then you would be able to apply in the U.S. Again, in terms of collaboration, it goes back to my answer on the engineering consulting thing. Any money that's coming from the award has to be spent in the U.S., but you can collaborate using other funds and things of that nature with the Netherlands office as much as you want. Yeah. We only restrict the spending of the money that we are providing as part of the award. Here, and then we'll make that the last question, I think.
So I did an STTR application, and NIH chose the scientific review committee. After it was evaluated, they sent me a list of the people on the scientific review committee. There were 25. One of them was world-class in the field, and the other 24 had 0 experience in the category. It was pretty clear that the 2 anonymous ones were in that group of 24. Given that a lot of the reviewers on the scientific review committee are volunteers, what can you do to try and make sure that the right type of expertise is within the scientific review committee so that you get competent people, looking at the technology? I mean, we had one guy, if they had chosen him, who was a top guy in the world. The other 24 had 0 experience in the area.
Yeah, so a couple things, that's unfortunate when that happens. One, talk to your program officer. So in terms of actually your specific application and anything you want to talk about relating to what those reviewers said, you would have to do that discussion with your program officer. However, if you want to contact the SRO to kind of make a general comment and request that you don't think that that there's enough people with expertise in X, and you'd hope that for future panels they would incorporate, that's something you can address with the SRO, but they will not talk about your specific application. They will refer you to us. SRO, Scientific Review Officer. When you get they're the ones that manage that review. When you get your summary statement, their contact information will be there as well as the program officer. Okay, thank you very much.